2026 as part of our focus on week 1, where we're looking at the foundations of business and enterprise. My guest is our good old friend, Michael Kottoh of Konfidants, who will be walking us through what 2026 looks like for businesses. When we come back, Michael joins us with some very interesting thoughts on the subject. Stay with us. Welcome back to the 2026 edition of the Citi Business Festival, coming to you on 97.3 Citi FM and on Channel 1 television. So we're focused on the foundations of business and enterprise in Ghana, with a very close look at the state of business in Ghana. Who else do we have but the managing partner of Konfidants? Konfidants are really into business intelligence, they are into strategy, they understand the 360 of the business and the economy, and Michael has joined us graciously. Michael, thanks for joining us. Welcome to the 2026 edition of the festival.
Thank you, Bernard, and congratulations to you and the team for another edition of the Citi Business Festival. This is incredible how you've kept this going for how many years now?
This is our 20th year. We've done this for 2 decades, and it's still going
really
strong.
Special edition.
I'm telling you. And we really want.
Thank you.
We really wanted you to.
It's always a pleasure to be a part of this.
Wonderful. Wanted you to lay a foundation for some of the things we'll be discussing in future by telling us what type of year this is, where we've come from, and also what that portends for business in the country. So I'll give you a few minutes to lay out your presentation before I engage with any questions.
Thanks again very much, and it's a pleasure to be on the show for 2026. I think the subject matter before us, the state of business in Ghana, is quite a big topic, and obviously we cannot cover all the issues pertaining to the state of business in Ghana, but I will try and look at some of the broad trends, and then we can dive into some of the unique perspectives that we've put together, including conversations that we've had with businesses and entrepreneurs in different sectors of the economy. We have to start with obviously a good look at where we've come from, because to understand the state of business in Ghana today, we have to compare it with where we've come from. And I think 2022, right up until 2025, 26 is a good timeline to use. As we would all recall, obviously 2022 was the peak of the crisis that the economy experienced in the last couple of years. Inflation peaked at 54%. Citi was in free fall. We went through a debt default, and the banking sector was significantly stressed. I think on all fronts, that was a very, very difficult year for the economy and for businesses. In 2023, I think we went through the domestic debt default and went through the IMF, program. 2024, there was a restructuring, better restructuring on the Eurobond, and external debts were completed, and we began to see some stability return to the markets. 2025, 2026, I think, has been what most analysts agree on as the turnaround year. So this has been, the broad curve that we've traveled, especially on the macro side. And I cite these because, the state of business, to understand the state of business, you really have to look at the operating environment. And the macro environment is really the fundamental. So this has been the journey. And if you look at the macro headline indicators, as I did mention, from a peak of 54% in 2022, now we are under 5% inflation. So that's quite a remarkable turnaround, and that should mean something for businesses and consumers. For the currency, I think the Citi has also fairly stabilized. It's bounced around, but I think since 2025, right up until now, we've seen it, between $1 to 10 cedis right? Between $1 to 10 cities and 11 and 12, it keeps bouncing between that range. So at least it's at a level that most businesses consider fairly stable, at least over the past year. Average lending rate has come down significantly. We know the policy rate has, reduced by half. It's at about 14%, keeps trending downwards. And what that means for average lending rate to the market is significant because in 2024, I think the average lending rate was about 31% for businesses to borrow. It's now about 16% for the most prime borrowers. So that's again also dropped by about half, and there are indications that it might, continue trending downwards. So these are broad macro indicators that have very significant implications for businesses, and I think we've seen the turnaround in that sense. If you look at GDP growth, because that's important, how well the entire economy is growing is important for businesses. That has also significantly increased. GDP growth has, risen from 3%, 3.1% in 2023. We are now at 25. We are now at 6%. That's reported GDP growth in 2025. So that again is that's a good story. Exports have boomed overall, 19 billion to 31 billion. Although it's important to emphasize that a lot of that is just gold prices and gold exports, and so that's overall for the macro situation is good, but we need to qualify that export story. Now, other important indicators that businesses care about include utility costs, so energy, water, very, very important, electricity, and fuel. If you look at the data, if you take electricity cost has been rising gradually since about 2024. And if you look at electricity cost for non-residential and industrial users, which is basically businesses, the data shows that it's gone up by an average of about 23% since 2024. So that's rising cost for businesses. If you look at the cost of water, because industrial concerns use a lot of water, that has also gone up by about 19% since 2024. So in terms of utility cost, that's been going up. If you look at the situation with fuel prices, and that's another very, very important one, between petrol and diesel, we've seen it fluctuate. Petrol, I think if you compare from 2024, May 2024 to May 2026, petrol effectively has stayed flat. It reduced, but it started, rising again. So over the period, I think effectively, it's the price has been stayed flat, but it has started rising again since last year. So that's a concern for businesses that the initial gains in petrol prices coming down started going up. And I'll talk a bit about some of the factors driving these increases. And but diesel has gone up by about 14.9%, almost 15% since last year. So utility costs have been rising, fuel costs have been going up, and that's a concern for businesses. The other key indicator is taxes. There's been some encouraging news on taxes for businesses. We know that the VAT revisions have brought down the effective VAT rate to about 20%. It's a marginal reduction, but that counts for something in terms of business cost. We COVID-19 levy, abolished, so that again is good for businesses. SME VAT threshold, I think, was increased from 200,000 Ghana cedis to 750,000 Ghana cedis. So there's a lower compliance burden for small shops and micro businesses. So that's also something that smaller businesses are happy about. We know that there's been other reforms around NHI and Get Fund. On another front, we've seen the recent introduction of the aviation tax, the airport development tax, which I think could have implications for the tourism and hospitality sector. So there are concerns that that could dampen travel if it increases the cost of travel to Ghana. That could make us less competitive in the area of hospitality and tourism. So that's one area where there are concerns. So overall, in terms of business taxes, these changes and reforms have eased the burden. But what that means then is that the GRA has tightened enforcement because they need to make up for what they cannot collect in the tax rates in volumes. So they need to go out and collect more taxes. So things like the mandatory digital invoicing, that raises a bit of administrative oversight for businesses, which is good for the country because we need to increase our tax to GDP ratio. But for businesses, yes, some of the taxes have come down, but enforcement and compliance have become tighter. So the overall verdict, if you look at the key operating metrics that we've looked at, energy and utility costs have been rising, they are not falling. So that's an issue. Cost of capital has come down. So that's good. Tax burdens have, reduced. Cost of imports, again, because the cedi has stabilized, cost of imports have become relatively cheaper than when the cedi was in a free fall. So that's also good because we're heavily imports exposed and import-dependent economy. So what happens with the exchange rate is important as a transmission mechanism all the way through, businesses, including manufacturers. So that's a good story. But we know that at the ports, importers are complaining about, new software that has been introduced, public and AI system. Obviously, the objective is to flag undervaluation. So the complaint is that it's leading to overvaluation. The GRA has said that they've been able to collect more taxes. The last figures I saw about $1 billion. So for the GRA, this is working, but businesses are complaining. The midterm concerns for businesses. So number one is the cedi beginning to reverse its gains. We've seen that, it's 2025, it was a 40% gain against the dollar. But so far this year, it has lost about 8 to 10%. So there are concerns that the cedi might start reversing again. So that's a concern. The Middle East conflict, the Iran-US-Israel war and global oil prices, that's a huge one. I spoke about energy cost. And energy cost again, have a transmission impact across the entire economy. So in Ghana, we export oil, but we are a net importer of fuel. So that's a big one. One Makola business person we spoke to said, that they have had to reroute, their shipping. Things they used to ship from the UAE, they've had to reroute it, and it's beginning to impact cost of business. The gold concentration rate is a big issue because a lot of the stability we have now is gold. So that's also a risk. If something happens to gold prices, we are very vulnerable in terms of the stability that we have now. There are concerns about doomsaw and energy and electricity. And, there's been some intermittent load shedding in the last couple of months. Even though officials cite infrastructure upgrades, businesses remain very weary about the energy outlook. And of course, the IMF transition, now we're transitioning into a voluntary mechanism. The question is whether the government can keep its discipline.
PCI.
So these are clear concerns. Now, in terms of opportunities, where does all these macro trends mean? What doors do they open for businesses? The first one, obviously the cost of capital has reduced, and that's a good story. So for businesses that are looking to, undertake expansion or capex, this might be a good time to consider, you know, if you have good credit and you can take some loans, this is probably a good window. Although, of course, it's expected that these lending rates will keep trending downward. So if you're taking a loan, you might want to consider whether you're taking a fixed or variable, interest loan, because there are implications that you have to look at your sector. For importers, there's a relief because exchange rates are stabilized. And a lot of local producers still depend on a lot of, imported inputs. So the thing with imports is very important, even for local production and exports. And the stability is good there. It's a good opportunity now. If you need to import inputs and raw materials, perhaps this is a good window to do some of that. Agro-processing and manufacturing, the cyclical issues are good, but a lot of the issues there are still very structural. It's still very difficult to get access to long-term, cheap capital. Energy cost is still too high, and we saw they've been rising again, and it's not good if you're doing manufacturing and processing. It's post-harvest loss is still a big issue in the agricultural sector. So for agro-processing, that's still a big challenge. Access to adequate and consistent access to raw materials, for agro-processing. So we still have issues in agro-processing and manufacturing, but there are also expectations that as we exit the IMF program, the government is going to loosen up, the monetary tightening that has brought down inflation. So they might start pumping money into the system again. So big projects like the Big Push and some projects in agriculture, contractors on the procurement front, businesses that are, providing services in those value chains might begin to see a lot of cash flowing through the system. And consumer spending, the disinflation all the way down is good for consumer spending. So purchasing power might, begin to revive across retail, health and education. So these are businesses that are in these sectors. It will be good, to look at these are windows of opportunities. We spoke to businesses.
Yeah, Michael, before you get to that, I think you've given us a lot to chew on. So I would pause here, take a short break. When we come back, I'd like to hear what the businesses have been saying to you in their own words. Because you've done the macro, you've given us a history, you've done the analysis, but it's good to hear what the business have said. And then I'll pose a few questions to you as well. So this is our on-air series for the Citi Business Festival. And today we're looking at the Ghanaian business context for 2026, opportunities and possible risks with Michael Kottoh of Konfidants. Stay with us.
From Accra to Buenos Aires, from Lagos to London, the world is locking in for the greatest football spectacle on earth, the 2026 FIFA World Cup. But before the first whistle cuts through the noise, there's a deeper rhythm to the game. Every badge carries history, every player brings a story, every number means something. Welcome to World Cup Central, only on Channel 1 TV.
Hello and welcome to another episode of World Cup Central right on Channel 1 TV.
Your home of football intelligence with African energy and global perspective. We're taking you beyond the highlights, from powerful eye-opening stats to sharp breakdowns of every qualified nation to insights that change how you see the beautiful game.
Their first appearance was in 1930 and their best
Welcome back. So today we're looking at the state of business in Ghana, the opportunities and realities for 2026. Michael Kottoh has taken us through a fantastic presentation. I particularly like the midterm concerns for businesses, whether the Citi, for example, is reversing the Middle East conflict and what it portends for global oil prices and to an extent our local prices, and a few other points. Especially taxes have come down, interest rates are coming down, but energy is a concern. So we need to keep an eye on the Middle East. And then the IMF transition and all of that. Obviously, the stronger macroeconomy, as he says, opens the door to cheaper capital to expand. relief for importers, not just for finished products, but because we import a lot of our raw materials. And then this could mean a stronger cash flow. But Michael, I like the fact that you spoke to micro and small business operators. Give me a sense of what they said and whether their views reflect this picture you've painted for us from the macro side.
So, you know, SMEs constitute over 90% of businesses in Ghana, as we all know. And within that 90%, small and micro even more dominant. So one of the things we decided to do this time around was to actually speak to these entrepreneurs and businesses and operators, and to just get a sense of what their sentiments are. So what I'm going to show is not a comprehensive survey. It's more of a sentiment a survey that we did. We spoke to businesses in different sectors, and because what the small guy, what a mom and pop shop, you know, what a small processor thinks, and what their outlook is, really is what represents the majority of businesses in the country. So we went to, obviously, spare part dealers are a big part of the business. So we spoke to a couple of spare parts dealers. One, and I have a few quotes on what I'm going to show you are mostly quotes, right? Which kind of like is fairly representative of the broad and many diverse views that we gathered. One spare parts dealer wanted to see whether, okay, so the macro figures are showing, cheaper credit, FX and all of that. So one said, now I get a loan at 17 to 18%, compared to 24% 2 years ago. But the documentary requirements for accessing FX have increased. So a lot of importers have to access foreign exchange, dollars, to go and import the things that they import. So this is a typical spare parts dealer that says, yes, I can get loans at a cheaper interest rate now, but in order to get foreign currency to import, the documentary requirements for that in the banking system and in the forex markets have increased. So this is how they process this. So we know that the stability of the Citi is not just the gold. It's also been accompanied by other more stringent interventions to control the circulation of foreign currency in the banking and financial system. So you can see this reflect in terms of the concerns of a typical, spare parts dealer. Building materials, because construction is a big part of our economy. And what happens with building materials and construction materials is important. So we interviewed a lot of businesses in that sector. And this quote here is a very interesting one. It says that prices for most building materials have declined and demand is better now than it was 2 years ago.
Okay.
But the price of iron rods keep appreciating marginally. So the overall story, that the prices of cement and, paint and other building materials have reduced. And so for businesses in that sector, a good number of them said that has reflected in terms of demand, right? So folks are buying more materials. So at least for that sector, that's good. Now, in the catering sector and food and beverages, we spoke to a couple of small operators. One operator said that, I've increased both prices and sales compared to 2 years ago. But I have experienced an increase in demand, and I attribute that to strategies that I put in place to improve service quality and reach wider markets. So over here, we have an entrepreneur that has actually increased prices, but hasn't seen demand fall. And so it tells you that no matter what's going on in the business environment, there's a lot that businesses themselves are able to do to stay more competitive. And this is one classic view. Textile and fabric dealer, this is one in Marcola said the cost of import is slightly lower than it was 2 years ago, but on my next consignment, I will raise prices because the Iran war has disrupted the transshipping routes for my goods in the UAE. So I have to reroute through more expensive line. So you can see how, geopolitics is kind of offsetting some of the gains that, would have translated into more competitive pricing and gains for consumers. In terms of auto and Chinese EVs, there is this view that we picked up a lot. There's a car dealer that said 2 years ago prices were higher, yet people were buying more cars. But with improved exchange rates, people now import cars directly. They're not buying from us dealers. So my sales are lower. And cheaper Chinese EVs are flooding the market. So that makes new combustion engine vehicles hard to sell. So we picked up a lot of this Chinese, retail and wholesale issue. Another, business said, although prices are slightly higher than 2 years ago, sales are not as good. So prices are slightly lower than 2 years ago.
But sales are
not as good. My biggest clients complain that there's no money in the system, and Chinese competition is a real threat. They've set up shops nearby with cheaper goods. And then there's another person that complained about delivery businesses and the carton, because sometimes they say some people order food or they order an item online, and the cost of delivering the item is as high as the cost of the product that they've purchased. And so businesses that are using the online channels are struggling because the cost of delivery is too high. And that's a concern. So there's a lot of business booming online, but this is a concern. So overall, the outlook, as we spoke to businesses, is fairly cautiously optimistic. But if you blend that with the macro trend, I think a lot hangs on the currency stability because it kind of feeds into everything else. So this is just a sample of some of the sentiments from. We spoke to a few manufacturers as well, and for them the issues remain very structural. As I said, agro-processing and manufacturing, the issues are very structural. They appreciate the short-term macro trends, but they are more concerned about the structural issues, the long-term issues. The ability to access long-term cheap capital, because that's what agro-processing and manufacturing requires. Issues of energy, the cost of energy is still a big issue, and they complain about those issues substantially. So this is just a quick view of the sentiments.
This is amazing. Michael, I had many questions for you, but what I will do is leave it here for now. And hopefully, I will create a panel conversation in the course of the month where you will come in to address key questions arising from this. Because I think this is a very good foundation for something we'll be doing. We call it the economic outlook. We've done the version 1 in April, want to do one end of June. So I think this has given us a very good base for a half-year review of the economy. So we'll just leave it here, right? We'll leave it here and say thank you for this very fantastic overview of the state of the Ghanaian business sector, looking at opportunities and realities in 2026. We'll be speaking to Michael Kottoh on today's edition of the Citi Business Festival On Air series on 97.3 Citi FM, as well as on Channel 1 Television. Brought to you by Absa Bank, MTN, Zonda Tech, and Petra Trust. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.